The rain wasn't just falling, it was attacking the city. It came down in thick, gray sheets, pounding on rooftops and overflowing gutters, turning the streets into shallow, rushing rivers. Inside his car, a man sat gripping the steering wheel, his face lit by the dull glow of the dashboard. His name wasn't important, but his life was. He was a father, a single father, and the weight of that title sat on his shoulders every minute of the day. In the back seat, his little girl, his whole world, was safely buckled in. She was humming a tune from a cartoon, her small voice a bright spot in the gloomy evening. He was tired, the kind of tired that goes deep into your bones. His day had started before the sun came up, making breakfast, packing a lunch, finding a missing homework folder. Then came a full shift at his job, where he fixed things that were broken, his hands always moving, solving other people's problems. Now all he wanted was to get home. Home meant dry socks, the simple pasta dinner he'd promised, and the mountain of laundry waiting to be folded. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was theirs, built on routines and small, precious moments. Save a few precious minutes. He turned off the main road. This route took him through a part of town that time seemed to have forgotten. The buildings were older here, the sidewalks cracked and uneven. The rain made everything look blurred and lonely. His windshield wipers slapped back and forth, a frantic rhythm trying to keep up. That's when he saw it. A shape on the sidewalk. At first, it was just a dark blob in the downpour. He almost drove right past. His mind was already at home, thinking about turning on the kettle. But something made him look again. In the flash of his headlights, the shape became a person. In a wheelchair. He drove past. His foot didn't even lift from the gas pedal. Not your business. A voice in his head said, practical and tired. You have your own child to look after. The world is full of trouble. You can't fix it all. But his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, and he saw it. The wheelchair wasn't moving. It was tilted awkwardly. One of its front wheels was jammed deep into a jagged crack where the concrete of the sidewalk had broken apart. The person in the chair was just sitting there, completely still, soaked through by the relentless rain. They weren't struggling. They weren't calling out. They were just waiting, accepting it. A cold feeling, different from the chill in the air, spread through his chest. He saw his daughter's face in the mirror, her innocent eyes looking out at the rainy world. What if that was her one day? What if she needed help and everyone just drove by? Daddy? Her small voice piped up from the back, as if she could read his thoughts. Why are we stopping? He didn't have a good answer. He just knew he had to. With a sigh that came from a place deeper than his tired muscles, he put on his hazard lights and pulled the car over to the curb. Stay right here, sweetheart, he said, his voice firm but gentle. Lock the doors. I'll be 1 minute. He stepped out into the storm, and the rain immediately soaked through his jacket. It was cold and shocking. He jogged the short distance back to the wheelchair, the water already dripping from his hair into his eyes. Up close, it was worse. The person in the chair was a young woman. She was drenched. Her clothes, a thin sweater and jeans, were plastered to her skin. She had no coat, no umbrella. A flimsy plastic grocery bag was on her lap, but it was useless, soaked and torn. Her head was bowed, wet hair covering most of her face. She was shivering violently, a constant, silent tremble. Hey, he said, raising his voice over the drumming rain. He crouched down a little, trying to get into her line of sight without seeming threatening. You're stuck. Your wheel's caught. Can I help you? For a long moment, there was no reaction. He wondered if she could even hear him. Then, very slowly, she lifted her head. Her eyes met his, and what he saw there made his breath catch. It wasn't just the discomfort of the rain. Her eyes were empty, hollowed out by a kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with being tired. It was a deep, soul-crushing weariness. She looked utterly broken. She gave the smallest of nods. He moved quickly, not wanting her to be out in the cold a second longer. He bent down, his strong hands gripping the cold, wet metal of the wheelchair frame. He planted his feet and pulled, gently at first, then with more force. The wheel was wedged in tight. With a final, grating scrape of metal on concrete, it came free. "There you go," he said, straightening up. "You're loose, but you can't stay out here. It's freezing. Where are you trying to go? Do you have someone I can call?" The young woman just stared ahead, into the rain. She shook her head, a tiny, defeated movement. She had no destination. Just then, he heard a small sound behind him. He turned. His daughter had gotten out of the car. In her little pink boots and bright yellow raincoat, she looked like a tiny sunbeam in the gray world. She was holding her small umbrella, struggling to hold it high against the wind. Her little face was wrinkled with concern as she looked at the stranger in the wheelchair. "Daddy," she said, her voice clear and pure. "She's all wet. She's gonna catch a cold." And that was it. That simple, childlike statement of fact cut through all the adult hesitation, all the thoughts about not getting involved. His daughter, with her simple kindness, had made the decision for him. He looked from his daughter's worried face back to the young woman's empty one. "She's right," he said, his voice softer now. "This is no good. Come on. My car is right there. Let's at least get you dry and warm. We can figure out the rest after that. Okay?" He wasn't really asking permission anymore. This was an act of necessity. He positioned himself behind the wheelchair, his hands on the handles. He waited for her to protest, to say something. She didn't. She just stared at his daughter, who gave her a small, shy smile. Slowly, he pushed the wheelchair through the puddles toward the car. He helped her into the front passenger seat, folding the bulky wheelchair and wrestling it into the trunk with a loud clatter, getting even more soaked in the process. When he got back into the driver's seat, he was dripping everywhere. The inside of the car felt suddenly very small and very quiet, filled only with the sound of the rain on the roof and the soft shivering of the young woman beside him. He turned up the heat, blasting warm air into the car. His daughter leaned forward from the back. "Hi," she whispered to the woman. "I'm 7. The young woman looked at the little girl, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than emptiness passed through her eyes. It was just a flicker, but it was there. She didn't speak, but she gave another small, almost imperceptible nod. The father put the car in drive and pulled back onto the empty, rain-washed street. He had no idea who this person was, where she came from, or what her story was. His simple plan for the evening, pasta and laundry, was completely gone. All he knew was that he had a shivering stranger in his front seat and his daughter in the back, and he was taking them both home. The real storm, he would soon learn, wasn't the one raging outside the car windows. It was the one sitting silently beside him, and it was only just beginning. The drive home was quiet, except for the rain and the whoosh of the heater. The father kept his eyes on the road, but his mind was racing. What was he doing? He had a complete stranger in his car. He glanced over. The young woman had curled in on herself, arms wrapped tight around her middle, still shivering. Her gaze was fixed on the blur of wet streets outside, but she didn't seem to be seeing them. She was somewhere else entirely. In the back, his daughter was uncharacteristically quiet, watching their guest with wide, curious eyes. They finally pulled into the parking lot of his apartment building, a plain, sturdy block of homes. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence felt heavy. "Okay," he said, his voice too loud in the quiet car. "Let's get you inside and dry." He helped her out of the car and into the wheelchair, which was slick with rain. His daughter scampered ahead, holding the building door open with all her little strength. The hallway was warm and smelled of carpet cleaner and someone's dinner cooking. Felt safe, ordinary. Their own apartment door, with a little doodle his daughter had taped to it, swung open to reveal their life. A couch with a blanket piled on one end, a small table cluttered with coloring books and a cereal bowl from the morning, shoes kicked off near the door. It wasn't messy, but it was lived in. A home built for two. The young woman hesitated at the threshold, her wet wheelchair leaving a dark smear on the floor. She looked overwhelmed by the simple normality of it. Come in," the father said, gently pushing the chair inside. "First order of business is getting you out of those wet things." He moved to the small hallway closet, his mind clicking into a practical mode. He found an old, soft gray sweatsuit, the kind he wore to relax in. It would be huge on her, but it was clean and warm. He held it out. Bathroom's right there. You can change. Take your time. She looked from the clothes to his face, then down at her own soaked sweater. Slowly, she reached out and took the bundle, her fingers brushing his. They were ice cold. She didn't say thank you, but the look in her eyes held a flicker of something. Gratitude, or maybe just disbelief. While she was in the bathroom, he sprang into action. "Okay, kiddo," he said to his daughter. "You're on hot chocolate duty. Marshmallows?" His daughter nodded enthusiastically, already pulling the step stool to the kitchen counter. He filled a kettle and put it on the stove. The familiar routine was calming. He grabbed another towel from the linen closet and laid it over the couch where she would sit. The bathroom door opened with a soft click. The young woman emerged, swimming in his clothes. The sleeves of the sweatshirt hung past her fingertips, and she had to roll the waistband of the pants over and over to keep them from dragging. She'd towel-dried her hair, leaving it in damp waves around her face. She looked younger like this, and even more fragile, lost in the fabric. His daughter gasped, not unkindly. "You look cozy," she announced. Then she frowned. "Your feet must be cold." She disappeared into her room and came back clutching her most prized pair of socks. Bright purple, covered in glittery unicorns. She held them out solemnly. "You can wear these. They're the warmest." For the first time, the young woman's face changed. It wasn't quite a smile, but the severe, tight line of her mouth softened. She looked at the socks, then at the little girl's earnest face. Very carefully, she took them. Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse and raspy, as if it hadn't been used in days. That whisper felt like a victory. The father let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Got your hot chocolate right here," he said, placing a steaming mug on the coffee table. He had one for himself and a smaller, cooler one for his daughter. They sat, the father in his armchair, his daughter curled next to the young woman on the couch. An awkward silence settled, filled only by the sound of rain on the window and sipping from mugs. The father's mind was full of questions, but they all seemed too big, too sharp, for this quiet moment. His daughter, as usual, had no such worries. She slid off the couch and fetched her giant sketchbook, the one filled with drawings of animals, family portraits with 3 suns in the sky, and fantastical, sprawling houses. She plopped it onto the coffee table right in front of their guest. "Do you like to draw?" she asked, as if this was the most important question in the world. The young woman looked at the book, then at the girl. She gave a small, slow nod. "I can show you my best ones," his daughter said, and she began to turn the pages, chattering away. "This is a dragon cat. Purrs and breathes bubbles. This is me and Daddy at the park. I drew the slide really big because it's the best part. This one is a robot who makes pizza." The father watched from his chair, sipping his cocoa. He saw the young woman's eyes begin to follow the little girl's finger as she pointed to details. He saw her, once, almost reach out to touch a particularly colorful drawing of a rainbow fish. She didn't, but her body, which had been tensed like a coiled spring, began to relax, just a little. She was listening. She was present. After a while, his daughter handed her a blue crayon. "You can draw on the next page if you want. It's empty." The young woman stared at the crayon as if it were a strange and magical object. Very slowly, she reached out and took it. She didn't draw anything. She just held it, her thumb rubbing over its smooth wax surface, her gaze distant again. But she was holding it. The father got up to start dinner. The simple act of chopping an onion, boiling pasta, stirring sauce was grounding. He kept an ear on the quiet conversation in the living room. His daughter was now telling her all about her best friend at school and the upcoming class play. The young woman didn't speak, but she was nodding along, her eyes on his daughter's animated face. When dinner was ready, he called them to the small table. He'd made a simple spaghetti, nothing fancy. He held a chair for the young woman. She maneuvered herself from the couch to the chair, a movement that seemed stiff and deliberate. They ate mostly in silence, but it was a more comfortable silence now. The father noticed things. Her hands, as she twisted the spaghetti on her fork. They were clean, her nails neat but short. But there were marks. Very faint, pale lines around both wrists. They weren't dramatic or angry-looking, just thin, white traces, like the ghost of something that had been there a long time ago. He also saw the slight, constant tremor in her fingers, the way the fork wavered just a bit on its way to her mouth. This wasn't just someone who was down on their luck. This was someone carrying an injury, a history. He tried a gentle question. "Is there anyone we should call for you? Let them know you're okay." She looked down at her plate, her shoulders hunching. She shook her head. "A friend? Someone from where you live?" He was careful not to say home. Another slow shake of her head. Her eyes were glued to the spaghetti, but she wasn't eating anymore. He changed the subject. "The spaghetti okay? I know it's just from a jar." She looked up, met his eyes for a second, and gave that same small, almost nod. It was enough. After dinner, his daughter, full and sleepy, got ready for bed. She went through her whole routine, brushing her teeth, picking out a story, saying her prayers. She included a special line tonight. "And please help the lady feel warm and not sad." The father's heart squeezed as he tucked her in, kissed her forehead. "You were very kind today," he whispered. "She's nice," his daughter whispered back. "She listens." When he came back out to the living room, the young woman was still at the table, just sitting, staring at her hands in her lap. The apartment was quiet. The rain had softened to a gentle patter. The crisis of the storm was over, but the real work, he sensed, was just beginning. He had gotten a stranger dry and fed, but the chill she carried wasn't just from the rain. It came from somewhere deep inside, and he had no idea how to reach it. He cleaned the kitchen slowly, giving her space, waiting. The night stretched ahead, quiet and uncertain. The quiet in the apartment felt thick, like the air after a storm. The father finished wiping the kitchen counter, the cloth moving in slow circles. He could see the young woman from where he stood, still as a statue at the table, her head bowed. The oversized sleeves of his sweatshirt hid her hands, but he could picture them in her lap, those thin fingers with their faint, pale lines. Lying perfectly still, he took a deep breath. He couldn't just go to bed. He walked over, not too close, and leaned against the doorframe of the living room. "The rain stopped," he said, his voice softer than he meant it to be. I can give you a ride somewhere. A shelter, maybe, or a friend's place, even if it's far." She didn't move. "But," he continued, choosing his words with care, like he was walking on a frozen pond, "I can't take you somewhere in the dark, not knowing if it's really safe. Not after all this." He gestured vaguely, meaning the wheelchair, the rain, the deep, silent hurt that seemed to radiate from her. "Is there anything you can tell me? Anything at all?" Silence. He was about to give up, to just go make up the couch for her, when she slowly lifted her head. Her eyes weren't looking at him. They were looking past him at the small bookshelf next to the television. It was cluttered with photo frames, a few knickknacks from his daughter, a small potted plant that was somehow still alive. Her gaze was fixed on one picture in particular. It was a simple frame. In it, a much younger version of himself stood stiffly in a uniform, a serious expression on his face. It was his official photograph from when he'd finished his training a lifetime ago. Next to that was a silly, joyful picture of his daughter, maybe 3 years old, riding on his shoulders, both of them laughing, blurry with motion. The young woman stared at the picture of him in uniform for a long time. Her breathing changed, became a little quicker, a little shallower. When she finally spoke, her raspy whisper cut through the quiet like a rusted blade. "You were a soldier." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, heavy with recognition that he was surprised she could tell from that old, small photo. "Yeah," he nodded, pushing off the doorframe and taking a tentative step into the room. "A long time ago, I was a medic." That word medic seemed to land differently. Her eyes flicked from the photo to his face, searching for something. She was weighing him, he realized. measuring the man in the picture against the man in the wrinkled shirt standing before her. The war inside her was visible on her face. A terrible struggle between a desperate need to stay silent and a terrifying need to speak. Her lips parted, closed. She looked back at the photo of his laughing daughter on his shoulders, then down at her own hands, now clenched into fists in the sweatshirt pockets. The struggle lasted a full minute, the only sound the hum of the refrigerator. Then her shoulders slumped, as if the last bit of strength had drained out of her. When she spoke again, her voice was so low he had to strain to hear it. "My brother," she began, and then stopped, choking on the words. She took a shuddering breath. "My brother." He was a Marine. The father's heart went cold. He knew what was coming next. He had heard that tone before in waiting rooms in quiet corners. It was the tone of before and after. "He didn't come home," she finished, the words flat, final. The air left the room. The father said nothing. There was nothing to say. He just waited, his own memories, of lost friends, of that particular, aching grief that settles over a unit, rising quietly to the surface. He gave a slow, understanding nod, a gesture between soldiers, between people who know that some losses carve out a piece of you forever. He expected her to cry then. But she didn't. Instead, a strange, determined look came over her face. It was fierce and full of pain. She moved her hands from her pockets and placed them flat on the table. She looked at them, as if giving them a silent command. Then, she began to push herself up. The father started to move forward, an instinct to help, but he froze mid-step. He watched, utterly confused, as she pressed her weight onto her hands, her arms trembling with the effort. Her legs, bent under the table, straightened. She was standing up. His brain couldn't make sense of it. The wheelchair was right there, a hulking, black shape in the corner of the room. He had pushed her in it, lifted it into his trunk. She had sat in it, motionless, in the pouring rain. But now, she was standing, on her own. Her legs were shaking violently, like a newborn deer's, but they were holding her. She took one clumsy, staggering step away from the table, then another. Her hand shot out to brace herself against the back of the couch. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the bookshelf, at that picture of his younger self, as if it were a lifeline. The truth crashed over him, not in a wave, but in a slow, dawning horror. She wasn't paralyzed. Seeing the realization flood his face was her breaking point. The fierce determination shattered, replaced by a wave of pure shame and anguish. A small, wounded sound escaped her lips, and her legs buckled. She didn't fall hard. She just sank down, crumbling onto the couch, pulling her knees to her chest, making herself small. The father finally moved, sitting carefully on the coffee table in front of her, keeping distance but leaning in. He didn't say, "You can walk." That was obvious, and it was the wrong question. The right question was hanging in the air, terrifying and immense. "Why?" The story came out then, in broken pieces, between gasps that were not quite sobs. It wasn't told in order. It was fragments. There had been a car. A year ago. An accident. It was raining, she whispered, her voice hollow. Just like today. Her brother was driving. He was home on leave, surprising her. They were going for ice cream. A sharp turn. A blur of lights. The screech of metal she still heard in her dreams. "The doctor said I was lucky," she said, her tone implying it was the cruelest joke ever told. Her physical injuries, a broken arm, bruised ribs, had healed. Her brother had not been lucky. "He was gone before they got there," she said, and this time the tears came, silent and fast, streaming down her face without a sound. "I was just stuck in the car, next to him." The father closed his eyes for a second. He could see it. The scene was horribly clear. After the funeral, something inside her just switched off. The world became too loud, too bright, too fast. Leaving her apartment felt like walking into a battlefield. The guilt was a physical weight, a concrete block on her chest. "It should have been me," she breathed, the words poisonous and familiar. He was the strong one. He had a life. I was just there. The anxiety became a cage. Her legs, perfectly capable of moving, simply wouldn't obey her brain's commands anymore. It wasn't a choice. It was a total system failure, a psychological revolt. The wheelchair was provided after a brief hospital stay, a tool for a body that had declared a mutiny against the world. Her family, tired, grieving in their own way, couldn't understand. They saw a body that worked and a will that wouldn't. They called it a choice. They said she needed to try harder. They grew frustrated, then distant. And today, she said, wiping her face with the giant sleeve. Today I couldn't be in that empty apartment anymore. With that chair. I hated it. I thought if I could just force myself, if I could just go out into the world and make my legs work. Her plan, born of pure, desperate madness, was to wheel herself until she couldn't, then get up and walk, to shock her body back to life. But the world was cold, and the rain was heavy, and the crack in the sidewalk was deep. The wheelchair stuck, and the will, the frantic, furious will that had propelled her out the door, vanished. She was just left there, soaked and broken, in a chair that was both her prison and her only shield, waiting for a rescue she didn't even believe in anymore. She finished, spent, her head resting on her knees. The truth was out. The astonishing, heartbreaking truth. It wasn't about a wheelchair. It was about a grief so colossal it could paralyze a soul. It was about a mind, wounded in a crash more devastating than the physical one, trying to protect itself by shutting down. The chair wasn't for her legs. It was a fortress for her shattered heart, and today, she had tried to desert it, and failed. The father sat on the coffee table, the weight of her story pressing down on him. He looked from this trembling young woman to the picture of himself in uniform. The medic in him understood trauma, understood how the mind could trap the body. The father in him ached for the brother she lost, and for the person she lost in that crash, too. He finally understood the marks on her wrists, not from struggle, but from the tight straps of a hospital gurney, from a time when her body was someone else's to move and care for. He understood the tremor, not of weakness, but of a nervous system that had been screaming in panic for a year. The mystery was solved, but the problem, the deep, tangled, painful problem, was just sitting there on his couch. And he had no idea what to do next. The quiet that followed her story was different now. Before, it had been heavy with secrets, with things unsaid. Now it was full of the terrible, echoing truth. She sat curled on the couch, her face hidden, utterly spent. The father stayed where he was on the coffee table. His own mind reeling, he looked at this young woman, shrunken inside his clothes, and he didn't see a stranger anymore. He didn't see a problem to be solved. He saw a casualty. The battlefield was different from the ones he knew, but the damage was just as real. He thought of the men he'd served with who came home with all their limbs but were missing something else inside, a light that had gone out. They would jump at loud noises, stare into space for hours, their minds stuck in a loop of some awful moment. People would say, "But you look fine," and that was the hardest part. Looking fine when you were broken, he understood now. The wheelchair wasn't a lie. It was a cast. If someone broke their leg, you wouldn't rip the cast off and yell at them to walk. You'd let it heal. Her break was in a place no cast could reach. He took a slow breath. Can I say something?" he asked, his voice low and rough. She didn't lift her head, but she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod against her knees. "I want you to listen to me, okay?" He began, choosing each word as if it were a fragile thing. "What you're carrying, that guilt, that weight, it's not just in your head. It's a wound." He paused, letting that sink in. "When I was training, they taught us about wounds you can see and wounds you can't. A bullet hole, a broken bone, everyone understands that. They see the blood, the cast, they get it. But a wound from a blast, from a shock, it can scramble everything inside. A person can be standing there, looking whole, and be hurt worse than the guy bleeding next to him." He leaned forward a little, his elbows on his knees. "You were in a crash. Terrible, violent crash. You didn't just break your arm. Something in your spirit, in your nerve, got shattered. And no one in their right mind would look at a person with a shattered leg and say, "Come on, get up and walk. You're not trying hard enough." He saw her shoulders tense. She was listening, every muscle taut. "That chair," he said, glancing at it in the corner. "People see that, they think they understand. They think the problem is in your legs. But it's not. The problem is the wound no one can see. The wound that happened when you lost your brother. And you've been trying to heal that wound while everyone is yelling at you to run a marathon." He stopped. He had said his piece. The room was silent again, but the air felt clearer, as if a window had been cracked open. Slowly, very slowly, she uncurled. She lifted her head. Her face was blotchy from crying, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. But they were looking directly at him, and for the first time, they held a flicker of something other than despair. It was a raw, stunned recognition. It was the look of someone who had been speaking a language no one understood, and had finally heard a single word of it spoken back to her. For a full year, she had been told to be strong, to move on, that it was time. She had been met with frustration, with pity, with awkward silences. The message was always the same. "What's wrong with you? Why can't you just be normal?" Not once had anyone said what this man, this tired single father who fixed things for a living, had just said. Not once had anyone validated the sheer, physical reality of her pain. They had tried to reason with a wound. He had simply acknowledged it, that a fresh tear escaped, tracing a clean path through the salt on her cheek. But this tear was different. It wasn't the silent, hopeless leak of before. It was accompanied by a shuddering breath that sounded like relief. "The worst part," she whispered, her voice cracking, "was feeling like I was going crazy, like I was making it up. Because my legs, they work. I could feel them. But when I tried to tell them to move, it was like the message got lost. There was just this wall of panic." He nodded. "The mind is powerful. Can do that. It can lock doors to keep you safe, even if the room it locks you in is a prison." She looked down at her hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. "The marks," she said, almost to herself. "From the ambulance. The straps. I was screaming. I didn't even know I was screaming. I just wanted to get to him." "You were in shock," he said simply. "Your body was doing what it had to do." The simple, non-judgmental statement of fact was like a bomb. She wasn't a drama queen. She wasn't weak. She was a patient. For the first time in a year, she felt like a patient with a real condition, not a failed person. He watched her process this. The change wasn't dramatic. She didn't stand up and walk. But the terrible, clenched-up energy around her began to soften. The invisible armor she wore, the armor of shame and defiance, seemed to loosen its plates. He got up slowly. "I'm going to make some tea," he said. It was a normal thing to say, a boring, domestic thing. It was exactly what the moment needed. In the kitchen, as the kettle hissed, he looked out the dark window at his own reflection. He was astonished, but not by a secret identity or a twist of fate. He was astonished by the sheer, lonely power of misunderstood pain. He was astonished that a person could drown in plain sight, with everyone around them saying, "But you're on dry land." He was astonished that a simple act of seeing, really seeing, could feel like throwing a rope to someone who had been underwater for a year. He brought 2 mugs back to the living room. He handed one to her. Her fingers brushed his, and they were still cold, but the violent trembling had eased to a faint, occasional shake. She took a sip, holding the mug with both hands, letting the warmth seep into her skin. She looked around the small, warm, messy apartment. She looked at the child's drawings on the fridge, the lonely sock on the floor, the comfortable dent in his armchair. She saw a life that was not easy, but was real and anchored. "I don't know what to do," she said quietly, not in despair this time, but in honest confusion. "I don't know how to get from here to there." He sat back in his armchair. "Well," he said, thinking it through aloud, "you don't have to figure that out tonight. Tonight you're safe. You're warm. That's the mission for now. Tomorrow we can look at a map. There are people who are trained for this. People who know how to help minds heal from wounds like this. It's not magic. It's work. But it's possible. He said we. It was a small word, but it landed. She wasn't alone on this cliff edge anymore. There was a person on the path below, not pulling her, but ready to steady her if she tried to climb down. The astonishing truth was out. It had left him humbled and heartbroken, but also with a clear, calm purpose. The rescue from the rain was complete. But a different kind of rescue, a much longer and more careful one, had just begun. And it started not with pushing a wheelchair, but with speaking a simple, profound truth. Your pain is real. I see it. And for someone lost in the dark, that was the first and brightest light. She stayed for 3 days. It wasn't planned. The first morning, the father woke up early, as he always did, to get his daughter ready for school. He moved quietly, half expecting the young woman to be gone, thinking she might have slipped out in the night, back into the vast, intimidating world. But she was there, asleep on the couch, curled tight under the blanket, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been the night before. She looked young, just a kid, really. He let her sleep. Over breakfast, he explained the situation to his daughter in simple terms. Our guest is very sad because she lost someone she loved very much, he said softly. Her heart is hurt, and it makes it hard for her to do some things. So we're going to be kind and quiet, okay? She might not talk much. His daughter, spooning cereal into her mouth, nodded with solemn understanding. Like when I had the flu and my body felt all heavy? Kind of like that, yeah, he said, grateful for her simple wisdom. When the young woman finally stirred, the routine of the small apartment wrapped around her. There was no pressure. The father went to work, but he called on his lunch break. Just checking in, he said, his voice casual. There's leftovers in the fridge. Help yourself. It was a small gesture, but it said, you belong here for now. His daughter, coming home from school full of chatter about her day, would sit and draw, sometimes pushing a piece of paper and some crayons toward their quiet guest. One afternoon, the father came home to find them at the table, his daughter coloring a princess, and the young woman carefully, intently, shading in the background of a tree with a green crayon. She wasn't drawing her own picture, but she was adding to his daughter's world. It was a start. On the second morning, after his daughter had gone to school, the father sat down with a cup of coffee. The young woman was sitting up, watching the sunlight through the window. We need to make a plan, he said gently. A good, slow, next step plan. You can't live on my couch forever. He said it with a small smile, so she knew it wasn't a rejection. She nodded, her eyes showing a flicker of fear at the word plan. I know a guy, he continued, an old friend from my time in the service. He talks to people for a living now, helps them with wounds you can't see. I called him yesterday. He knows someone, a specialist, who works with people who've been through what you've been through. There's a place, a kind of quiet house where people can go to get better. It's not a hospital. It's more like a workshop for getting strong again. He watched her face. She was listening, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. The first step, he said, his voice calm and steady, is to go meet this person, just to talk. No commitments. We can drive there together. But before that, he put his coffee down. It's a nice day. Sun's out. I think we should get some air. Just to the mailbox and back. We'll go as slow as you need. Her eyes went wide with panic. The mailbox was at the end of the apartment building sidewalk. It was a world away. She glanced toward the corner where the wheelchair sat, a silent, familiar shadow. You don't need that, he said, not unkindly. Your legs work. They're just scared. And that's okay. We'll go together. I'll be right beside you. If you need to stop, we stop. If you need to turn back, we turn back. The mission is just fresh air. That's all. Took her a long time. She sat on the edge of the couch, breathing deeply, her hands clenched. He didn't rush her. He just waited, putting on his own shoes. Finally, she stood up. Her legs trembled violently. She looked like a fawn on ice. He offered his arm. Not for her to lean her weight on, but for her to hold on to. A steadying post. She gripped his elbow, her fingers tight. The first step out the front door was the hardest. The sunlight seemed too bright, the space too wide open. She froze on the doorstep, her breath coming in short gasps. Just to the railing, he murmured. She made it to the railing that ran along the sidewalk. She held onto it with one hand, his arm with the other. They moved one slow, shuffling step at a time. The journey to the mailbox was maybe 50 steps. Felt like 50 miles. Her whole body was rigid with effort, not physical but mental. A battle against an invisible tide of fear. His daughter's small blue bicycle lay on the grass nearby. A neighbor waved from a window. Car drove past. Normal life happening all around. And she was walking through it. When they finally reached the mailbox, she was pale and sweating. But she was there. She looked at the metal box, then back down the long sidewalk to the apartment door. A strange, shaky breath escaped her. One that sounded almost like triumph. "Okay," he said softly. "Mission accomplished. Let's go home." The walk back was a little quicker, a little steadier. That evening, he helped her make the call to the counselor. She spoke in a soft, halting voice, but she spoke. An appointment was set for the next day. The third day, he drove her to the appointment. He waited in the car. When she came out an hour later, her eyes were red from crying, but they were clearer. She said it's called a trauma response. She told him quietly on the drive back. She said, "It's not my fault." She said, "We can work on it." It was the beginning. A week later, she moved into the supportive living house. It was a calm place with a garden and other people moving slowly through their own recoveries. The father and his daughter drove her there, her few belongings in a bag. It was a goodbye, but not the kind that hurts. It was a goodbye like a first step. Sundays became their day. The father and his daughter would pick her up, and they would all come back to the apartment for dinner. Spaghetti again, or sometimes chicken. Normal food. Normal talk. She would walk in through the front door on her own, slowly, but without holding his arm. Each week, her steps were a little more sure. One Sunday, she brought 2 gifts. For his daughter, a beautiful sketchbook with thick, blank pages. "For all your best ideas," she said. And for the father, a small, hardy potted plant. "It's hard to kill," she said, and they both laughed, a real, easy sound. After dinner, as they washed dishes, his daughter drawing at the table, she spoke softly to him. "You saved me, you know?" He shook his head, handing her a wet plate to dry. He looked out the kitchen window, remembering the rain. "I didn't save you," he said. "I just pulled a wheel out of a crack. You saved yourself. You just needed someone to stand in the rain with you for a minute. To stand with you until you remembered you weren't alone in it." He meant it. The real rescue hadn't been him pulling her from the storm. It was him believing her pain was real. That validation was the key that let her start to rescue herself. She visited for months. She grew stronger. The hollow look in her eyes filled in, slowly, with life. She started talking about maybe taking a class someday. She laughed more. She was healing. And the father found his own life changed in a quiet way. His small family of 2 had gently, softly, become a family of 3. Not by law or by blood, but by something simpler, by choice and by kindness. He still fixed things for a living. But now, he understood that some of the most important things you fix aren't machines, but moments of human connection. You can't fix a broken past, but you can offer a dry place to stand in the present. You can offer an arm to hold onto for a few shaky steps. And sometimes, that's enough to help someone find their way back into the sun.